guppies to groupers, tropical and marine fish in the home aquarium. Your host, Paul Spees.
The definition of a successful aquarium is rather simple. Do your fish like it, and do you like it? It's as simple as that. Now, in order to get the aquarium successful for the fish, we've got to consider two major elements: the quality of the water and the fish's diet. And today we're going to look at the first of those, the quality of the water. It's really rather amazing that we can take this cross-section of fish that we select arbitrarily from our pet shop and put them together and hope that they're going to exist in the aquarium, despite the fact that they come from so many different parts of the world and bodies of the world. And you take a look at the average community tank like this, and I grant you that it's not average in the sense that you might think of it. Their fish are rather large, but in the sense that it is a mixture of fish from all over the world and fish that live in different zones of the water, that is with reference to the top, middle, bottom, that kind of thing. We do have an average community tank. And these fish, as I say, come from every different body of water imaginable. They're used to their own particular waters in their home aquarium, and we take them then and put them in our aquarium and say, here you are, here's what our waters like exist. And they do. Now, it's rather amazing that they can, but it's because of the adaptability of these fish. The old larger fish in here, for instance, like the sucker-mouth catfish, they're Plecostomus punctata. He spends his life on the bottom of the aquarium. He's got a mouth that's adapted to clinging to rocks. Probably comes from a little swifter moving water, higher oxygen content. Then, for instance, one of the free swimming fish, like the Charlie Brown there, as we call him, the Cyclosoma managense, a beautiful fish, a gulper, going to eat big fish, and Charlie Brown, or the Oscar here, the Ostranatus ocellatus, a beautiful fish. Now, those two fish come from, or spend their life in sort of this middle zone of the water in terms of depth. The Oscar comes from South America, and the Charlie Brown there comes from Central America. But the real ability of these fish to exist in our aquarium, regardless of the type of water we provide them, is because of this adaptability that I mentioned. And it really is a function of the water that they're used to. Because if you start thinking about where we might find these fish in nature, suddenly you're thinking of slow-moving streams, rapid-moving streams, old ponds, lakes, swamps, each one with their different type of water, each one with a different type of chemical buildup, oxygen content, that type of thing. And then when you couple that with climatic changes that change these waters as the life of the fish goes on, consider, for instance, a swamp that has, an average depth of maybe 2 or 3 feet. The fish are existing in there, and suddenly the rainy season approaches. Well, now the water depth is going to go up, the oxygen content is going to be a lot higher, temperature will go down a little bit, and the fish adapt to it. And the other end of that spectrum is the summer dry season, when there's no rain for a long period. Water level might go way down, temperature up, oxygen down, and yet the fish adapt to that. And it's primarily because of what they've been subject to in their natural habitat that they developed the adaptability that makes them so easy to mix together. Very fortunate for us, because literally these fish come from all over the world. There are fish in here, for instance, this big school of free-swimming barbs in there that you see, the Barbodes schwanenfeldi. They come from, the Far East, Thailand, Borneo, probably acid water, but a middle free-swimming fish compared to fish like the African lake fish right here. This is one of the tilapia, and they get quite large. It's Tilapia mariae. They don't get as large as some of their cousins, the Osaka and Lido, Squamopinus, all tilapias, which are part of the economic food picture in Africa. but there's a free-swimming lake-type fish, and you might compare him to one of the old horse faces here, the Geophagus juraperi. Let's see if we can find one of these guys, because this is another cichlid, but instead of being the typical free-swimming one that we've been thinking of, here's one here. These fish are going to spend a lot of time near the bottom of the aquarium. And you would expect that. The name Geophagus there, it means earth eater. And this guy is going to spend a lot of time mouthing the gravel for what he can get out of it in the way of food. And so you can expect your gravel to be disturbed quite a bit. But here's fish from from the Geophagus there that we're looking at is a South American fish. The tilapia was an African river fish. We've got a school of barbs from the Far East. So all over the world is really the case here. And different zones in the water, different requirements. And yet we put them all together and we say exist, and they do. And it's because of this adaptability that is part of their makeup, because they go through that as a part of their daily life. Not daily, but subject to climatic changes. Now you compare that to the typical saltwater aquarium, and you've got a different picture, because these fish, which live in the ocean, live in such a large volume of water that you can hardly conceive of a natural climatic change, even a tidal wave or something like that, that could really affect that huge volume of water. It could change it in the least way. So these fish lack that adaptability. And we'll talk more about this when we get around to the saltwater aquarium. The question of these adaptabilities in the aquarium with respect to freshwater, because that's what we're going to talk about today, is a major issue because it's so vital to the consideration of water quality. And that's the big consideration today. Let's take a look at some things that make up the water in the sense that we think of it with respect to our fish. One of the first things that naturally comes to mind is oxygen, because that's of prime importance. Let's look at that, because on the face of it, when you consider what water is, you say, well, there's a lot of oxygen in there. For instance, there's water, and it looks like there's a lot of oxygen in the water, and there is. But unfortunately, that oxygen is not available to the fish. Short of a laboratory technique, you can't separate that oxygen from the hydrogen. No, the oxygen that is available to the fish, which is gaseous oxygen, is soluble in the water and is dissolved in the water and is replaced in the water here as it is used up by the fish in their natural life cycle through the surface. It comes from the air. And it's replaced by continually moving this surface around by the air stone, as we see working here, by these filter stems, which, while they're filtering, also tend to move the surface around so that we get this reabsorption of oxygen down through there. So the oxygen is a dissolved gas in the water. Now there are a couple of other natural dissolved gases, if you will, that are in the water. Neither one of them very good. One of them, chlorine. The other one, carbon dioxide. Now chlorine is very common to us. That's put into any of the municipal water systems. And it's harmful to the fish. And if you've been a hobbyist for any length of time at all, you know what you do with that. You either let the aquarium set overnight, and the chlorine passes out of the water. And by the way, the warmer the water, the less chlorine it can retain. So if you start with warmer water, you can get rid of the chlorine quicker. Not too warm. You don't want to break the glass in the aquarium. You can also get rid of the chlorine in the water by using any of these prepared substances, and there are any number of them, and these actually precipitate the chlorine out. Now these two are just for removal of the chlorine. This also removes the chlorine, but it's does many other things, and besides the chlorine. It's a good buffer, and we'll talk more about that when we get around to the saltwater aquarium. But the chlorine we can take care of. It's not a problem if we approach it right. Carbon dioxide, of course, comes from the respiratory byproduct of the fish itself. Just as we exhale carbon dioxide, so do the fish. Now, this is absorbed by the plants in their photosynthesis, and we're going to be talking about that next week. So the carbon dioxide and the chlorine, which are natural gases, just like the oxygen, are also dissolved in that water. Unfortunately, there are some other gases that can be dissolved in that water. And one of them is this one, ammonia. Now, I'm talking here about ammonia that could appear in there as part of a cleaning process around the house. Mother, if you're cleaning the windows in the room that has the aquarium in it, or the glass coffee tabletop, and you're using the typical prepared spray cans that have a lot of ammonia in it, and you can smell that, vent the room somehow. Get that door open, get the windows open, because you have to remember that the filter and the air stone, as we look at them, with this air being bubbled through them, it's being supplied by a small air pump. And that air pump is taking its air from the room. So whatever's in the room air is being pumped into the aquarium. So watch the spray-type cans. Paint fumes are just as bad. And Dad, if you've got a poker party going and you've got 5 guys in there playing stud and you're all smoking cigars, believe me, so are the fish. Because the pump is picking that up and bubbling it into the aquarium. So we've got some other unnatural gases in the aquarium, if you will. Ammonia or any fumes or sprays, it could be in rooms, smoke, that type of thing. How do you know that something of that nature has gotten into the aquarium? Well, the behavior of the fish is going to be different. You know how your fish act because you feed them and you look at the aquarium quite a bit. If their color is bad, if they're not eating right, behavior is off, suspect some kind of water deterioration. And how do we take care of that? Very simple. We change water. We change water. Now, as a regular part of our aquarium maintenance, we want to get used to changing water, probably 1/4 of the volume. Just eyeball it, about 1/4 of the volume once a week, or at least every couple of weeks. Siphon that out, take it right off the bottom of the aquarium, and then replace it with tap water. A little bit of chlorine that's in there is not going to harm the fish, and it might retard the bacteria, the free-swimming bacteria that are in there. So we want to be in the practice of changing water regular. That is also important from another standpoint. One of the real culprits in the long run, as far as deterioration of water quality, is evaporation. Now, if we take a look at this aquarium here, the water level is down below the frame, as we can see it here. And that's typically what we see, water level dropping as evaporation takes place. But you want to remember that when evaporation takes place, the only thing leaving the aquarium is water, pure water, distilled water for all practical purposes, and it leaves behind in the aquarium each time that little bit of chemical content that was in it when we first introduced it. Now, obviously, if we keep putting new water in from the tap just to replace that evaporation, the chemical content of that water changes. And pretty soon the water gets practically lethal in its chemical content. Now, I can distinctly remember years ago when the philosophy of aquarium management was completely different 25 years ago. We used to set up an aquarium and you would really treasure that old water. It was precious. You never threw it out. And I think back in retrospect, and we must have been really subjecting our fish to some awful things. I can remember one time I had a pair of wild angels that were, that big over the fins, just beautiful. And I had them down cellar in a 50 and feeding them, getting them ready, and geez, they got thriving. And I thought, boy, it's no place to keep these beautiful fish down in the basement. I'd get them up in my show tank in the living room. Well, I took them up and put them into this old aquarium now, quite aged in terms of the water. And in a matter of 15 minutes, they were in such bad chemical shock that I immediately rushed them out, took them back downstairs, and put them back in a 50. They never did recover. And it's strictly because of the condition of the water. Now you say, gee, my aquarium's pretty old. It's been set up for a couple of years, and and I haven't been really watching it, and my fish are all right. Well, that might be, but your fish have adapted, as we talked here, have adapted to this chemical soup that you have allowed to be created in your aquarium. And one sure sign that this is going on is the fact that the fish that have been in there seem to be existing all right. But the fish that you try to put in, new fish, never make it. That's a sure sign that the water is too rich, if you will, chemically. Water change, as we've discussed, minimizes that. Because when we draw off the water, we're taking out a proportional amount of the chemicals that are in there. So we've got to consider that water change. So let's put down this as a potential problem. Evaporation. Now we keep talking about this change in the water in terms of chemical buildup, chemical change. Well, fortunately, any change in the chemistry of the water reflects itself in changing the water from what would normally be neutral, an ideal water, to either the acid or alkaline part of the range. And we can measure that. There are kits available on the market that enable us to measure pH. And I've got 3 or 4 sample kits here. They all do pretty much the same thing. It's a colorimetric test. That is, we take a water sample from the aquarium, we put in the proper indicators, and we compare the change in the color of our aquarium water as we doctor it to an existing color chart. That tells us the pH. Let's put down that as a consideration. pH. Okay? And the range in this now, as I said, 7 is neutral, down to 0 at the acid end of the range, and up to 14 at the alkaline end of the range. Now let's take a look at how we might measure pH. As I said, these tests are pretty much alike. In most of them, there's a color comparison chart, like we have here, and we're going to run a water test, and then we're going to compare our sample against these colors as they're given here. So we get this small vial and the indicator, which is generally bromothionyl blue, and we take a water sample out of one of the aquariums here. And this particular one says fill the vial half full. So we get it, that's half full. And now we put 1 drop of the indicator in. And after we do that, we're going to agitate this. There we go. Now we agitate this because you can see the color change is starting to develop already in there. We want to get this mixed up. Now you want to do it by tapping on the bottom or rolling it around, agitating a little bit. Don't do it this way. Don't do that. That is, don't grab it and shake it, because in doing that, you're going to measure any acidity, for instance, that's on your skin. So you want to just agitate it this way, and you can see that there's a slight color change coming in there. And then what we do is we just take this and we compare our water sample against the colors on the chart, and we can read the pH of the chart directly from what we see there. Puts the sample on the floor there. Now, you can adjust the pH in the aquarium by using the chemicals that are with the kit. Generally, you don't want to be monkeying with the pH continually in the aquarium. If the fish are healthy, fine, let it be. Now, you get into some breeding, and we'll talk about this later. You may want to be adjusting pH, but do that when the time comes. It's not a good idea to be continually puttering with the pH to get it to some mark. Now, this particular one is pretty much the same type of setup. This has a larger tube only, and it's glazed on the bottom. We're going to fill a water sample up to this glazed mark. Again, then we'll put the bromothiamyl blue in there, the reagent, a couple drops in this one. Now, when you read this particular one, what you do is you take this tube with our water sample in it and the reagent, you put the tube down in there, we shine a light down in through the tube, just a regular flashlight or house light, and then the sample is read by viewing through this aperture here where there's a little mirror and comparing it to this color chart. Same type of test, a colorimetric test like that. Here's another different type. This one has a small blister pack in it. Again, you see the color comparison test that comes with it. We'll make a test against that. And this is handled in this way. This is as I say, a small blister pack with a chemical reagent on the card. And you can compress this because it's open through this little opening on the end, like the entrance to an igloo almost. And compress that. We put that in the aquarium, push that in, and it sucks a water sample in, and then it'll change that color. Now, let's just do that. We take a water sample out of this aquarium here. I just put that down in there, and I compress that with my thumb, like so, and then it draws in the water sample. Now, you can see that the change is rather rapid, because this one is already starting to develop now, and again, once we get that, we'll compare it to the color on this box, and we'll be able to read the pH directly. This particular pH kit measures pH and a number of other things for both freshwater and marine. This has a color wheel that goes with it and is just mounted in the back here very easily, and then is used by rotating it in the holder. And again, we take a couple of vials like so, and these are graduated here, and you fill it up to the 5 milliliter mark and put in the appropriate chemicals, run the test, and then do the color comparison with this holder. So these are all colorimetric tests. Now, I mentioned evaporation. When evaporation occurs in an aquarium where the water is very hard, you can expect in this area right here on the aquarium where the exposure is, where the water has evaporated, right down in here, you can expect to see a scale appear along there. And that's the minerals actually building up on the water. Now, if that's your condition, if you've got well water and you've got a problem of hard water, for Christ's sakes, don't have any shells in there, clam shells. Let me just mention that because they're water soluble. Put a lot more calcium in the water, you'll just get it harder. But if you've got a water hardness problem, it is possible to measure hardness in the water by the same type of testing that we've done here. This particular kit here measures hardness also, and it's the same type of test we've just gone through. A water sample in a vial and a reagent put in. Now, you know, if you've got hard water, it's tough to get suds. That's the basis by which this test is made. You put a soaping solution in there, agitate it a little more, and at the point you count the drops that you put in, and at the point where you've measured to the, and then finally got some soap suds, that number of drops gives you so many parts per million in terms of degrees of hardness. So that's a consideration in the aquarium, degrees of hardness. So we've got a lot of various things to consider when we talk about our what's happening to the aquarium water. We mentioned this. Suppose we ought to get that down there, chemical shock. And that happens if we ignore our water changing. Now, one other thing that we talked a little bit about last week, that is a big part of this, is filtration, of course. And this helps a lot in the maintenance of water quality. The filter certainly removes the particulate matter, the lumps, if you will. And, of course, the charcoal, the activated charcoal, absorbs the chemicals and tends to strip some of the chemicals from the water so that helps to relieve this chemical shock and coupled with water changes, reduces the total chemical buildup that can work against us so badly. By the way, when you're changing water here, might mention this again, if you're a plant keeper around the house, typical house plants, although this water is no good in the aquarium, it's good on your plants. Because after all, when we take that water out of the aquarium, we're going to draw this water, we're going to siphon it right off the bottom here. We're going to draw it right off the bottom so that we're picking up as much of the mold that is building up from the fish droppings, decayed plant leaves, whatever. We want to take that right off the bottom. Now, that's very rich in nitrogenous wastes. And as you know, that plants want nitrogen, they want phosphates and that. That water taken from your aquarium provides an excellent fertilizer for the plants. So use it in that respect. Now, there's another big consideration in terms of water quality here. And it doesn't become quite as critical in the freshwater aquarium. That's the nitrogen problem. Not nitrogen per se, but the byproducts of the fish, the excess food that's decaying, plant leaves decaying, they produce a lot of organic compounds that decay in there and cause problems. It's a much greater problem, as we said, in the saltwater aquarium because of their adaptability. But plants do help to control that in a freshwater aquarium. And of course, all we have to do is change water in a freshwater aquarium. You can do that in a saltwater aquarium. It just costs you a few more bucks because you got to replace that salt. So next week when we get together, we're going to be talking about plants. We'll talk about how they fit into the scheme of things. We'll see why we have all plastic plants in this aquarium right now. But we'll be talking a lot about live plants and the benefit they have to the aquarium, aside from the beauty, aside from the aesthetic standpoint. You know, there's a lot more. They do contribute to the balanced aquarium, if you will. I don't like that particular word. It's left over from yesterday, but they do have a function in the aquarium. So next week when you tune in, catch us, we'll be talking about live plants and their role in the aquarium.